Welcome to Module 3. In this module, we're going to be covering Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. And as you can see, Chapter 5 deals with attitudes, and Chapter 6 is all about stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. The two chapters are very linked to one another. In other words, everything that you learn in Chapter 5 is going to sort of introduce you to then what you're going to learn in Chapter 6. So definitely read them in that order. A lot of the theories about where our attitudes come from then help in understanding how we stereotype and how prejudices are shown and discrimination alike. So here is your to-do list as usual. Let's skip on down to the first item, which is your chapter objectives for Module 3. So again, this is on attitudes, and a lot of it has to do with theories and beliefs regarding the research on how we form attitudes, like where do our attitudes come from? Do they change? And if they do, how? Sometimes we hold very strong attitudes, and those may not change over time, and sometimes our attitudes are very fleeting and can change with anything, with our peer group, with what we're exposed to, the groups that we get involved with, and lots of other factors like that. So we're going to be looking at the different factors that contribute to our attitudes, and then in turn our behavior. So really we'll be looking a lot at how do and when do attitudes predict behavior, and if we know someone's behavior, can that also tell us maybe what their attitudes are? So it's kind of like goes both ways in looking at an attitude and then looking at a behavior. So we're going to be looking at tons of issues revolving around what influences those attitudes and those behaviors. We're going to be taking a look at pluralistic ignorance in more detail. Now, you were exposed to this the first discussion, so I'm hoping that we remember some of this, but here we're going to get a little further in detail with how it operates, looking at some of the theories up here to help explain it. So this might be a good spot to go back and look at some of those notes you took when we covered that article and we did the discussion question on pluralistic ignorance. There's some different theories as to how we make decisions. Sometimes our decisions are very carefully based on research, and we have a stepwise pattern to our decision making, and sometimes we make decisions very rashly and we don't think about them, or we might be influenced inadvertently without even realizing by the media, like commercials, by friends and their opinions and their behaviors and things like that. So we'll be taking a look at that. Also important here, getting into numbers 11, 12, and 13. Some of you are business majors. You'll be interested in this area here where we talk a little bit about persuasion and persuasive tactics, very much used in business and marketing and advertising. If you're in the field of industrial and organizational psych, it's a very applied area of psychology that uses social psych as its basis for understanding how we're persuaded. How can we think something or believe something and then change it based on how someone presents information to us? When do we change it? What types of persuasive tactics are effective? And on who? Does it depend? So we're going to be taking a look a little bit at that. So that's going to kind of wrap up that chapter, which is then going to lead nicely into prejudice, racism, and discrimination. This is a very loaded chapter. I actually spend about 2 weeks on it when I teach this as an in-class course, because there's just a lot here, and I think that it's rearing its ugly head again in our society today. We're seeing much more explicit prejudice and racism, where in the past couple decades it's been a little bit more implicit, a little bit more hidden. It hasn't gone away, as much as we think it has, despite having a African American president for 2 terms. We like to think that we've made big strides, but the research shows that, a lot of these beliefs that people hold, they come from somewhere. And once they're set, they're hard to get rid of. And so the chapter is going to cover some different theories as to how prejudice starts. What are the origins of it? How does it lead to racism? And how can that lead to discrimination, which is the behavioral act of racist thoughts or beliefs? So we're going to take a look at that in different environmental domains like the workplace. How does the environment affect our prejudicial thinking, if at all? Looking at the media and some interesting research with video gaming, I think is really relevant to today's sort of age and culture. And then we're going to just take a look at a lot of just the roots of racism, going back to just theory and research that support how racist thought develops, and more importantly, how can we eliminate it, if at all? At the very least, how might we be able to reduce it? What strategies have shown to be effective in changing people's thoughts and beliefs that may be in error, that may be prejudice and due to maybe inexposure or misinformation, which can often be causal roots of prejudice. So I'm going to be taking a look at all of that. Here are the article readings for these different chapters for Module 3. Here are your lecture slides for both chapters. And again, you want to make sure that you're watching the videos in Revel as you go through the chapter. You'll see those videos pop up. There's some great ones in there that you don't want to be missing out on. But I've gone ahead and added some additional ones. This one here is based on the seminal sort of studies that Jane Elliott did. She was actually a third grade teacher, so she wasn't a researcher or a psychologist, but she had some strong ideas about the roots of prejudice during the time of Martin Luther King Jr. And so she did some interesting little mini studies in her third grade classrooms. And so I found some videos that cover that. These are just really great. But these questions here, you don't have to answer these. You're not going to answer these and turn them in. They're more to get you thinking. These are things you should be looking for as you're watching the video, things to be paying attention to. Here's another one that we're going to be looking at, dealing with homophobic attitudes, especially in the media, how these can be a cause of those sorts of attitudes that we develop, the media being kind of the center of that. Here is a more research-based video. It was actually done by Dateline, but they interviewed 2 very influential researchers who study prejudicial thinking, particularly implicit prejudicial thinking. So that would be prejudices that you're not even aware that you have, but you do. How do we tap into that? Like if you're not aware that you're being prejudiced or that you hold certain thoughts, if you're not aware of that, then how does that affect your behavior, and does it even? So I've put some questions here. It basically deals with the IAT, which is a measure of implicit prejudice. It's a test that's designed to measure thoughts that we have that we can't necessarily pinpoint consciously, but happen sort of at a subconscious level. So very interesting stuff there. And then, I've kind of tied it to your text for some more information dealing with it. Your text also talks about this test and how it's used in the area of social psych. Okay, and then the last video you have here is really a movie. And when I teach this class in person, we watch this movie in class together. It's always fun. We have a great time with it. It came out in the 90s. Lots of great actors and actresses, won some Academy Awards. But most importantly, it just really highlights how deep and how widespread racism and prejudice really are in society. Many examples you'll see in the lives of the characters and how they all intertwine and relate to one another. I give you some questions again to consider here, dealing with old-fashioned or explicit racism versus implicit or modern-day racism. You're going to want to watch the film and be looking throughout the film for examples of these concepts. How do you see these things operating in the movie? And I also give you here attached in a Word document a short synopsis of the film if you haven't seen it, as well as a character list, because there's a lot of people in the movie. It can get a little confusing at first, then you've kind of got it, but it'll give you the names of all the people, so it might help to have that handy as you're watching it. It is on Netflix, I believe, but I've put a link to it here. I think you can find it on YouTube as well, but it's a great movie, and it is tied also to the discussion question for the week. So you definitely got to watch that, and you got to watch the video on IAT, because that also is tied in to the discussion questions. I said for the week, I mean really for the module 3. So you want to be watching those and taking good notes, and then have those notes handy as you're ready to sit down and start writing your discussion, because you're going to use those as examples. I did give back all your feedback on your last discussion modules and posts, and I'm hoping that you're all paying attention to that, and fixing any areas that you see that you need to develop a little bit more. If citations were an issue, please make sure you're using the Cite as you write document to help you out there and knowing how to cite APA style in what you're doing. So just make sure that you're paying attention to that. And really just integrating the concepts into your discussion. So pulling concepts from the chapters, I want to see that. That's important. Pulling them from the videos, when I ask for that, I'll usually say, hey, give me a couple examples from the video. So make sure you're doing that as well. And then lastly is exam 3, which covers chapters 5 and 6. And that closes on the 9th at 11:59 p.m. And that is it for Module 3. But again, let me know if you have any questions. Please feel free to email me. Thanks, everybody.